My name is Isadora Thorne. To most of the world, or at least the small, waterlogged corner of it I inhabit, I am a quiet consultant with a vague specialty in systems analysis. I live in a minimalist apartment in Seattle that overlooks the gray expanse of Elliott Bay, a space that breathes with the same quiet anonymity I've cultivated for myself. But that is the surface story, the one I offer like a cup of lukewarm tea to polite inquiries. The truth is rooted deeper, in the rich, damp soil of Bainbridge Island, in a house that smells of old books and wood smoke, where I was raised to be the second daughter of the Thorne family, a name that, in local engineering circles, was synonymous with brilliance, ambition, and a particular kind of unyielding expectation. My father, Arthur Thorne, was a retired aerospace engineer from Boeing, a man who saw the world in blueprints and schematics, his love expressed in quiet approval of a problem well solved. My mother, Helen, a former project manager, orchestrated our lives with a gentle efficiency that left little room for emotional messiness. And then there was Claire, my younger sister. Claire was the sun around which our small family's solar system orbited. She was effervescent where I was reserved, her achievements loud and sparkling, her path a straight, glittering line from a top-tier university to a fast-track career in software development. I was the shadow, the quiet one, the one who left a prestigious PhD program at Stanford after the first year, a decision that hung in the air of our family home like a permanent, unspoken disappointment. They thought I couldn't handle the pressure, that I'd faltered where Claire had soared. They didn't know that I hadn't faltered. I'd been chosen. The memory that became the cornerstone of my quiet exile was formed over coffee on a drizzly Seattle morning. I was 22, home for a weekend from Stanford, my mind buzzing with neural networks and machine learning theories. My mother and I were sitting at the kitchen table, the window panes weeping with rain. She stirred her coffee, the spoon clinking a soft, rhythmic beat against the ceramic. It's wonderful that Claire is getting so much recognition for her project at Sterling Coal, she said, her voice laced with that familiar, gentle pride. She looked at me, her gaze soft, but carrying a weight I couldn't yet name. You know, Isadora, she continued, placing her spoon carefully on the saucer, not everyone is meant to be a star. And that's perfectly all right. The world needs people to hold the ladder, too. She said it with such kindness, as if she were freeing me from a burden I didn't know I carried. She didn't mean to cleave my world in two, but she did. In that moment, she wasn't just my mother. She was the quiet voice of a verdict that had already been passed. I was not a star. I was the ladder holder. That sentence became the silent soundtrack to my life. I heard its echo in every holiday gathering where Claire's latest promotion was the centerpiece of conversation, while my consulting work was glossed over with a polite nod. When Claire bought her first beautiful townhouse in Queen and they threw a party, the house filled with champagne and laughter. When I secured a patent that would quietly redefine data encryption for my company, I told no one. There was no language for my achievements in our family's vocabulary. Their silence wasn't malicious, it was a form of blindness. They simply could not see a success that wasn't framed on a wall or announced in a press release. I left Stanford not because I failed, but because I was recruited. Alastair Finch, the reclusive, legendary founder of Aura Systems, had seen a paper I'd published on heuristic learning models. He'd offered me a position in a division of his company, so secret it didn't officially exist on any organizational chart, Project Chimera. We weren't just building technology, we were trying to teach a machine to reason, to dream, to possess an intuition that bordered on the humane. It was work that lived in the deepest shadows of intellectual property, guarded by non-disclosure agreements that were more like vows of silence. There was no graduation, no public accolade, only the quiet, thrilling hum of servers in a sub-basement facility and the immense pressure of holding a fragile, revolutionary future in my hands. For 10 years, I lived this dual life. I would spend my weeks in the sterile, high-security labs of Aura Systems, making decisions that had multi-million-dollar consequences, and then I would take the ferry back to Bainbridge Island for Christmas, stepping back into my role as the disappointing older sister. I'd watch Claire, radiant and confident, hold court while I stood by the fireplace, nursing a glass of wine, a ghost in my own home. A cousin once showed me a new family portrait on the mantelpiece. I wasn't in it. Oh, we had to reframe it, and the composition was better with just the three of them, my aunt had explained, patting my arm oblivious. Erased, to balance the frame. I told myself it didn't matter. I had survived the intellectual fire of Project Chimera. I didn't need to survive my family's gentle, soul-crushing indifference. I had built a life for myself in the quiet spaces they couldn't see. But the ache of being invisible in the one place you are supposed to be known most intimately is a wound that never truly heals. It just scars over waiting. The call came on a Tuesday in early October. The autumn air in Seattle had finally scrubbed the last of summer from the sky, leaving it a crisp, brilliant blue. My phone buzzed on my desk, displaying my mother's name. Her voice was, as always, pleasant and slightly distant, like a customer service agent reading from a script. Isadora, dear. Claire is being promoted to senior vice president at Sterling Cole. They're having a celebration at the Olympic Sculpture Park Pavilion on Saturday. We'd love for you to be there. A pause. Just try to blend in, dear. It's a very important night for her. Don't wear anything too artistic. No, how are you? No, I know it's short notice, but it would mean so much. Just a gentle command wrapped in the guise of an invitation. Don't make a scene. Don't be yourself. For years, my answer would have been a quiet, non-committal excuse. But something had shifted in me. Maybe it was the slow accretion of years, or the quiet confidence my work had given me, but I found myself saying, "I'll be there, Mom." I wasn't going for them. I wasn't going with any hope of a red carpet welcome. I was going for me. I wanted to stand in that room, in the heart of their world, and see if I could breathe my own air, untethered from their approval or disapproval. I wanted to know if the woman I had become in the shadows could survive in the light of their world without flinching. That Saturday, as the ferry churned through the cold, gray waters of Puget Sound, I stood on the deck, the wind whipping strands of hair across my face. The Seattle skyline, a collection of glass and steel teeth, grew smaller behind me. The ferry ride was always a journey through time for me, a passage from the sharp, demanding present of my life in the city to the soft, complicated past of my life on the island. The air on Bainbridge always smelled different of salt, damp earth, and cedar. It was the scent of home, a fragrance that was equal parts comfort and suffocation. The house was exactly as I remembered, a handsome craftsman nestled amongst towering firs, smoke curling from its stone chimney. I stepped inside, and the familiar warmth and the scent of my mother's lemon and thyme roast chicken enveloped me. It was an aroma of carefully managed domesticity. My mother greeted me with a quick, airlight hug. "Oh, good, you're here. Your dress is lovely. Very neutral." My father emerged from his study, a copy of Scientific American in his hand. He gave me a firm pat on the shoulder, the standard Arthur Thorne greeting. "Dora, good of you to make it." His eyes, however, had already moved past me, scanning the room for his other daughter. Claire made her entrance a few minutes later, a vision in a sapphire blue dress that matched the confident sparkle in her eyes. She moved through the room like a current, kissing our parents, her laughter bright and easy. When she finally turned to me, her smile was perfect, a beautifully crafted piece of social architecture. "Dora, I'm so glad you could come." She gestured to me as a cousin approached. "This is my sister, Isadora. She does some sort of systems consulting. Very niche." The cousin, a well-meaning man named David, smiled kindly. "Oh, that's interesting. Small business logistics?" "Something like that," I replied, my own smile a quiet, protective shield. There is a strange power in letting people underestimate you, a freedom in their misperceptions. I had learned to live in that space. The walls of the living room were a gallery dedicated to the Thorns, or at least, the Thorns they chose to celebrate. There were photos of Claire graduating, Claire accepting an award, Claire with our parents on a trip to Italy. My own university graduation photo, the last one ever framed, had been moved to a less prominent wall in the hallway, like a distant relative of fading importance. My 7-year-old niece, Claire's daughter, Lily, tugged on my sleeve. "Auntie Dora, did you ever build a robot?" she asked, her eyes wide. I crouched down to her level. "Sweetheart," I said softly, "I once helped teach a computer how to recognize a Monet painting from a single brushstroke. It's a bit like building a robot's soul." She blinked, processed this for a second, and then, deciding it was too complicated, ran off to play with the family's golden retriever. Dinner was a masterclass in Claire's quiet dominance. She regaled the table with stories from her work, weaving in the names of important executives with casual grace. At one point, her boss, who had joined us for the pre-party meal, complimented her on her drive. Claire beamed, taking a delicate sip of her Chardonnay. "Thank you. I've always believed that if you start something, you have to see it through. Walking away is just not in my DNA." The air thickened for a moment. Every eye at the table flickered toward me before quickly looking away. The message was as clear and sharp as a shard of glass. I didn't have to say a word. The ghost at the table had been acknowledged. Later, I slipped out onto the back porch, the cool night air a welcome balm. The house behind me was a warm hive of conversation, but I felt a universe away. In the distance, I could hear the mournful call of a foghorn from the sound. Tomorrow, I would go back to my world, to the quiet hum of servers and the elegant logic of code. But tonight, I had to stand here, in the shadow of my family's making, and remember who I was when they weren't looking. The pavilion at the Olympic Sculpture Park was a stunning cage of glass and steel, offering panoramic views of the glittering water and the silhouetted mountains beyond. It was a space designed to impress, filled with the self-assured hum of Seattle's tech elite. I was seated at a table near the back, a family table that felt more like a beautifully appointed holding pen for the less important guests. I was wedged between a talkative great-aunt and one of Claire's former sorority sisters, a woman whose perfume was an aggressive form of floral warfare. Claire was at the podium, bathed in the warm glow of a spotlight. She looked magnificent, her confidence a tangible force. She spoke of vision, of perseverance, of the unwavering commitment required to innovate. And then came the line I knew was coming, polished and aimed with surgical precision. "It's about honoring your team and the trust they place in you, a trust that is sacred and is broken by those who choose to abandon the path." Her eyes didn't find me in the crowd, but I felt the weight of her words as if they were stones. A few people at my table shifted uncomfortably. I saw a couple of my father's old colleagues from Boeing exchange a look. I kept my face a mask of placid neutrality, my hands resting calmly in my lap. I had spent a decade learning how to be unreadable. That's when he walked in. Alastair Finch never attended public events. He was the Howard Hughes of the tech world, a genius who preferred the company of his algorithms to people. His presence caused an immediate, palpable ripple through the room. The ambient chatter dipped. Heads turned. He was dressed in his uniform of a simple black turtleneck and dark jeans, his silver hair a stark contrast. He scanned the room with intelligent, impatient eyes, and then they locked onto mine. My heart didn't pound. My palms didn't sweat. But the air around me grew still, charged with a sudden, intense energy. He began walking toward my table, his path direct and unwavering, parting the sea of mingling executives. He came to a stop beside me. The chatter in the room didn't just quiet, it ceased. Claire's voice faltered at the podium, her words trailing off into a confused silence. Mr. Finch leaned down slightly, his voice low but carrying in the sudden stillness. "Isadora," he said, ignoring everyone else. "I was just reviewing the simulation data from the Chimera beta. The self-correction parameters you designed. It's not just code, it's poetry. We need to schedule a full-day deep dive next week. My office. He gave a curt nod, as if we were the only two people in the room, and then turned and walked out as quietly as he had entered. The silence he left in his wake was profound. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and certainty out of the room. Claire stood frozen at the podium, her perfectly rehearsed speech forgotten. I saw my mother's hand fly to her throat, her water glass tipping over with a soft thud that sounded like a cannon blast in the quiet. My father was half risen from his chair, his expression a disbelieving mask. A man at the next table, a venture capitalist with a famous name, leaned toward his companion. "Is that the Isadora Thorne?" he whispered, not quietly enough. "The one behind Aura Systems' Phantom AI project?" Slowly, I rose from my chair. I didn't need their validation, but in that moment, I refused to be a ghost any longer. I walked toward the exit, the eyes of the entire room following me. I felt their confusion, their recalibration, the tectonic shift in their perception of who I was. As I passed the podium, Claire cornered me, her face pale, her confidence shattered. "What was that?" she hissed, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and humiliation. "You planned that, didn't you? You stood there and let me look like a fool." I looked at my sister, and for the first time, I felt a pang of something close to pity. "The truth doesn't need a plan, Claire," I said, my voice soft but unyielding. "It just needs a little bit of light. If you feel small in its presence, perhaps you were never standing as tall as you thought." I left her there, her mouth open, no retort ready. The click of my heels on the polished concrete floor was the only sound. As I walked out into the cool, damp night, I didn't feel the sting of being unseen. I felt the sharp, clean pain of being seen, finally, in all my complexity. And for the first time, I realized that I was not a ladder holder. I was the architect of a world they couldn't even imagine. I didn't go back to the island. The thought of facing my family's bewildered questions was exhausting. Instead, I drove to my apartment in Belltown, the city lights a blur of silver and gold through my windshield. My home is a sanctuary of quiet order, white walls, clean lines, a single orchid on the windowsill. It's a space designed for a person who spends most of her life inside her own head. I had just kicked off my shoes and was standing by the window, watching the ferries drift like slow-moving stars on the water, when a notification pinged on my secure work terminal. It was a message from an anonymous internal address, flagged as high priority. The subject line was a single word: conscience. I opened it. Inside was a forwarded copy of an email, sent 2 years prior from a disposable address to a radical tech ethics blog. The body of the message was an anonymous, whistleblower complaint, alleging that a lead developer at Aura Systems, identified only as I, Thorne, was cutting ethical corners on a highly sensitive AI project, creating a catastrophic risk of systemic failure. The message was filled with technical jargon, but the phrasing, the specific cadence of the sentences, the choice of adjectives, was chillingly familiar. It was the way Claire spoke when she was trying to sound authoritative. It was a ghost from a past I hadn't even known was haunted. 2 years ago, I had been subjected to a sudden, intense internal review. My project access had been temporarily suspended. Mr. Finch had been furious, but the review board was following protocol based on an anonymous flag. The investigation found nothing and was quietly closed, but it had left a scar on my record, a faint question mark I could never fully erase. I had always assumed it was a rival inside Aura Systems. The email wasn't just an accusation, it was a carefully constructed fiction designed to cripple my career. I traced the metadata. The original email had been routed through a series of public proxies, but the initial login to the proxy service originated from an IP address registered to Sterling Cole Digital, timestamped late one evening. Claire's office. I found her at the after-party, which had moved to a chic lounge downtown. She was surrounded by a small circle of admirers, but the brilliant light in her eyes had dimmed. I waited until she stepped onto the terrace for some air, the Space Needle a glittering spire in the background. I held out my phone, the screen glowing with the text of the email. Her composure fractured. Just for a second, I saw the raw panic in her eyes before she masked it. "What is this?" "I think you know," I said, my voice devoid of accusation. It was a simple statement of fact. She looked away, toward the city lights, her jaw tight. A long moment passed. Then, so quietly I almost couldn't hear it over the distant traffic, she said, "Yes." I waited. "Why?" The word was a breath, a plea for an explanation that could somehow make sense. Her shoulders, which she always held so perfectly straight, slumped. "Because you were always supposed to be the brilliant one," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Even when you quit, Dad still talked about your potential like it was some holy relic. I did everything right. I followed the path. I got the promotions. I wanted to be the only star in the sky for once. I thought if I could just cast a little shadow on you, maybe my light would seem brighter." The confession was so small, so deeply human in its petty jealousy, that it didn't ignite anger in me. It unearthed a profound sadness. I saw the little girl trailing behind me, desperate to win a game of checkers, the teenager furious that I'd gotten a higher score on my SATs. Her entire life had been a competition I hadn't even known we were playing. "Claire," I said, the words heavy with a truth she couldn't comprehend. "The project you tried to sabotage, it's not just a product. Leaking even false information about it is a fireable offense. Potentially a criminal one." Her head snapped back toward me, her eyes wide with a fear that was no longer about being upstaged, but about real, tangible consequences. She said nothing. I didn't need her to. I turned and walked away, the cold night air doing nothing to cool the quiet ache in my chest. The deepest betrayals, I realized, don't come from enemies. They come from the people who were supposed to love you most, from the same hands that once held yours as you learned to cross the street. The alarm that woke me at 3 a.m. wasn't a sound. It was a vibration, a deep, urgent pulse from my work phone that signified the highest level of emergency. The screen glowed with a single, terrifying message: Containment Protocol, Chimera. Active threat. Muscle memory, honed by a decade of crisis drills, took over. I was dressed and in my car in under 5 minutes, racing through the deserted streets of Seattle toward the Aura Systems campus in South Lake Union. The building, normally a dark monolith at this hour, was blazing with light. The atmosphere inside was one of controlled panic. In the main operations center, a grim-faced security chief handed me a tablet. The core algorithm of Project Chimera, the very soul of the machine we had spent a decade building, had been copied. The data packet had been routed to a secure, encrypted server located in a server farm in Reykjavik. The breach was a catastrophic failure, an extinction-level event for the project. And worse, the forensic trace showed the initial intrusion point was a backdoor opened using my highest-level clearance credentials. Within the hour, I was sitting in a glass-walled conference room with Alistair Finch and 2 stone-faced members of our Internal Security Council. They didn't accuse me, but the question hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I was the primary suspect. I gave them full access to all my communications, my devices, my life. But as they dug, my mind kept circling back to Claire's email. It was too much of a coincidence. Using a secure terminal, I pulled up the archives from my internal review 2 years ago and cross-referenced them with the details of Claire's anonymous tip. I found it. The tip hadn't just been an accusation, it contained a link to a supposed internal report as evidence. That link pointed to a long-decommissioned backup server. But the link was malformed. It contained a typo. That typo, when processed by our old system, inadvertently created a temporary, hidden permissions loophole. It was a 1 in a million shot, a digital tripwire that had lain dormant for 2 years. Claire hadn't leaked the data, but her careless, malicious act of sabotage had unlocked the door. All someone had to do was find it and turn the key. My search for who might have known about that old, deprecated server led me to one name: Julian Croft. He had been my fiercest rival at Stanford, a brilliant but ruthless programmer who had been an intern at Aura Systems the summer that server was active. He knew its architecture. After I was recruited by Finch, Julian's bitterness had become a running joke in our old academic circle. He now worked as the head of R&D for Helios Dynamics, our biggest competitor. A soft knock on the conference room door broke my concentration. It was my father. He looked a decade older, his face etched with a worry so profound it seemed to have hollowed him out. "Dora," he said, his voice raspy. "They told me what happened. Is it true? Did you?" He couldn't finish the sentence. I looked into his eyes, and for the first time, I saw not a judge, but a terrified father. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I need you to trust me. Not because I'm your daughter, but because my entire life's work is on the line. I will find the truth." He held my gaze for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. The doubt receded, replaced by a flicker of the man who had once taught me how to solder a circuit board, a look of shared purpose. He nodded once, a gesture more meaningful than any words of comfort, and left. The next morning, I went to Alastair Finch. I laid out my theory. The breach wasn't me, but it was because of me. It was a complex web of sibling rivalry and corporate espionage. I requested permission to lead the investigation. It was an audacious request for a primary suspect, but I was the only one who understood all the moving pieces. Finch, a man who trusted logic above all else, listened without interruption. He walked to the window, staring out at the city for a long time. Finally, he turned back to me. "The board wants you suspended. But I built this company on betting on the right people. You have 48 hours to prove your theory. The floor is yours, Isadora." The war room was a sterile, windowless space in the sub-basement, its walls lined with glowing monitors displaying cascading lines of code. Alastair Finch had agreed to my unorthodox proposal. To trace the breach, I needed a team that could move with speed and absolute trust. I needed my family. It was the strangest board meeting of my life. I sat at the head of the table, the lead investigator. To my right was my father, Arthur Thorne, brought in as a consultant for his expertise in legacy hardware systems. To my left was Claire, her face pale and drawn, her own career at Sterling Cole hanging by a thread after she'd confessed her role in the anonymous email. She was here for her deep knowledge of software architecture. My mother, Helen, sat quietly at the end of the table, tasked with auditing 2 decades of access logs and project timelines, her old managerial skills suddenly, crucially relevant. The first few hours were excruciatingly cold. My father spoke only in clipped, technical terms, his eyes fixed on the monitors. Claire presented her analysis of the system vulnerability she had created, her voice a flat monotone, devoid of emotion. We were a family of experts, strangers in a crisis of our own making. My mother was the only one who occasionally looked from face to face, her expression one of dawning horror as she began to understand the full scope of the chasm that had opened between her children. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. While my father was analyzing the physical architecture of the old server, he found a notation about a diagnostic port that had been installed by a summer intern for remote testing. It was an undocumented, non-standard modification. The intern's name on the work order was Julian Croft. At the same time, Claire's analysis of the leaked data packet revealed something strange. It wasn't a simple copy, it was an altered version. Certain lines of code, specifically those governing the AI's ethical framework, my code, had been subtly rewritten to be more aggressive, more reckless. Julian hadn't just wanted to steal Project Chimera, he wanted to corrupt it, to turn my creation into a monster and release it under my name. He wasn't just trying to end my career, he was trying to destroy my legacy. That's when my mother slid a folder across the table. "From your Stanford files," she said quietly. "You left this box at home when you took the job with Mr. Finch." "I kept it. I read your thesis proposal back then." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a new, painful understanding. "I thought you were hiding something." Now, I think you were just trying to protect it." Her words weren't an apology, but they were something more vital. They were recognition. A quiet acknowledgement of the world I had been living in alone for so long. Later that night, our systems flagged a remote access attempt on the Icelandic server. Someone was trying to scrub the final transfer logs. The IP address originated from a private server hosted by Helios Dynamics. It was all the proof we needed. It was no longer just about my family's brokenness. Julian had used our quiet, personal fractures as the camouflage for his own ambition. He was hiding in the chaos we had created for ourselves. The operation to reclaim the data was swift and silent, a surgical strike conducted not with force, but with code. With the evidence we'd gathered, Aura Systems, in conjunction with international law enforcement, seized the server. Julian Croft was apprehended at his desk at Helios Dynamics. He didn't fight. In his formal deposition, he laid out his motive with a cold, clear bitterness. "She was always Finch's favorite," he said. "She got the project I should have had." The leak wasn't personal, it was a market correction. I wanted to expose the instability of her work before it contaminated the industry. His words were a testament to a grudge so old it had soured into a ruinous obsession. He had seen the crack in our family's foundation and had expertly driven a wedge into it. He hadn't broken us, he had simply given us the tools to break ourselves. When Claire read the transcript of Julian's confession, she sat motionless, staring at the words as if willing them to change. After a long silence, she looked at me, her eyes clear of artifice for the first time in years. "I never knew," she whispered. "I thought I was just throwing a rock. I didn't know I was starting an avalanche." "Sometimes we start fires just to feel warm," I replied, "and we forget that the whole forest can burn." Her face crumpled, but she held back the tears. That was Claire. Pride was the armor she wore over her guilt. The next day, she submitted her formal resignation to Sterling Cole and a full statement to Aura Systems, accepting responsibility for creating the initial vulnerability. She wasn't charged, as there was no criminal intent, but her meteoric career was over. She had signed away her future to reclaim a piece of her integrity. It wasn't a victory, but it felt like the beginning of something true. At our final debriefing, we sat around the same table in the war room, but the atmosphere had changed. When my father gave his closing assessment, he paused, looked directly at me, and said, "I spent my life valuing schematics I could read, and I was blind to the person right in front of me. I owe you an apology, Isadora." It was the first time I had ever heard him admit to being wrong. I met Claire's eyes across the table. I didn't see a rival. I saw a woman who was finally learning to stand on her own 2 feet without needing to stand on me to do it. A month after the crisis, I returned to a life that was both the same and fundamentally altered. I resumed my work at Aura Systems, but the shadows around Project Chimera had thinned. I was no longer just a lead developer, I was the architect of its survival. One thing had changed. Once a week, I taught a graduate seminar on AI ethics at the University of Washington. It was my own small attempt to ensure the next generation of innovators understood that the questions of why and should we were more important than can we. Claire was in my class. She sat in the front row every Tuesday, her notebook open, her questions sharp and insightful. She never missed a session. Sometimes when I spoke of the fine line between intuition and error in a learning machine, I could feel her go still, the weight of our shared history settling in the space between us. After class one afternoon, she handed me a sheaf of papers. It was a proposal for a nonprofit dedicated to teaching coding and digital literacy to underprivileged youth. "I don't need your approval," she said, her voice steady. "I just wanted to know what you think." I read the cover page and wrote a single word at the bottom: begin. Our family now existed in a new, quiet orbit. My mother started sending me recipes in the mail, with handwritten notes in the margins. "This one needs more time," she wrote in her last one. "Remember to eat." My father, when talking to his old friends, now referred to me as my daughter, the one pioneering ethical AI, his voice carrying a new, unfamiliar note of pride. We hadn't taken a new family portrait, but the next time I visited the house on Bainbridge, I noticed the old, cropped photo on the mantelpiece was gone. In its place was a simple, unadorned frame, empty, waiting. One evening, after my seminar, a young student stayed behind. He was nervous, barely 21. "Professor Thorne," he asked, "what's the hardest part about creating something so intelligent?" I thought for a moment, then gave him the only honest answer I knew. "Surviving your own creation," I said. "And learning to forgive it and yourself for not being perfect." That night, as I walked across the campus, the sky a deep twilight purple, Claire appeared beside me. She was holding a small box from a local bakery. She handed it to me. Inside was a single cupcake with a swirl of lavender frosting. "I know it's not your birthday," she said with a small, hesitant smile. I didn't need a grand gesture. I didn't need the world to know my name. I just needed this. A quiet moment, a shared understanding, a sister who finally saw me not as a rival, not as a ghost, but simply as I was. In life, the most profound battles are not fought in boardrooms or on battlefields. They are fought in the quiet spaces of the heart, in the long, slow work of seeing and being seen. Strength, I've learned, is not about who stands in the brightest spotlight, but about who has the courage to stand in their own truth, even when the light is dim. And sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is not to walk away, but to find our way back, not to the people we were, but to the people we have the potential to become.